Hey guys, Nail A Photo here. I'm so excited to make this video. I remember when I first started out with photography and I wanted to switch over to manual, I had no idea what I was doing. And not every video is going to be able to explain it. So this is the way that I like to think about it. And I really hope that it's helpful to you. I'm going to need the whiteboard to be able to explain this. So let's jump over, okay? So cool, let's jump into the basics. So you're switching over from automatic to manual. And you're just like, what the heck is going on? There's so much buttons. There's so many settings. There are three main ones to consider, and we call these the triangle of exposure. You have the ISO, you have the shutter speed, you have the aperture. Each of these affect the exposure, the lightness or darkness, all right? So you just switched over to manual, so now you're controlling each of these on your own. So what happens when one goes up or it goes down? What does it do to your image? Okay, let's talk about it. So when ISO goes up, exposure goes up. When ISO goes down, exposure also goes down. All right, so they work in parallel in that way. That's why I brought it up first, because it does get confusing after this. So you want your image to be brighter? One option, you can turn the ISO up. You want it to be darker? You can turn the ISO down. All right, now shutter speed. When your shutter speed goes down, your exposure goes up. So it does work inversely here. All right, shutter speed goes up, exposure goes down. Lastly, we have the aperture, and it kind of works the same way as your shutter speed. It works inversely from your exposure, all right? Aperture down, exposure up, and vice versa. Okay, so if there are three things that you can use to affect the lightness and darkness, then this should be super simple, right? Wrong. I wish it was that easy. I'm not gonna lie to you. I wish it was that easy. But each of these things also affect a different part of your image. For example, the ISO affects how much noise you're seeing in the photograph. Like, think about this. Have you ever tried taking an indoor photograph at night with very little light, very low light setting, and you have no flash, and you have your camera on automatic? Try taking that photograph. You'll end up seeing your camera compensate a lot with the ISO, and you'll end up with a very noisy image, right? Shutter speed. Shutter speed affects how much light is hitting your sensor. And the lower the speed, the more time. Higher the speed, less time. So lower the speed, more light's hitting, your exposure goes up. Increase the speed, less light's hitting, exposure goes down. And then you have the aperture. Aperture controls the depth of field of your image. Have you ever seen those images where your subject is tack sharp, completely in focus, but everything in the background is blurred? That's going to be when the photographer is playing around with the aperture. All right, that is the main focus of that image. You want a shallow depth of field, a razor thin depth of field, so that one line of it is in focus while the rest is out of focus. All right. Now is when the artistic part of photography comes in. There's no proper exposure. It all depends on what you're trying to convey. And I'll give an example now. So let's say, for example, you want an image where you're using a lot of motion blur. That's just the effect you're going for. The story you're trying to tell, motion blur is going to help tell it. All right. So what do? You turn down your shutter speed. You allow light to hit the sensor for longer, and therefore the exposure goes up. But now you see the entire image is brighter than when you started. It was perfect a second ago when you were on automatic. What do? You just want to compensate for it, all right? So you have two options. You've gotten your shutter speed to where you want it, decreased it to you decreased the shutter speed to increase the motion blur, and therefore the entire image is more exposed. So what can you do to compensate for that increase in exposure? Well, now you have two options. You can play with the ISO, or you can play with the aperture. All right, and let's say that you really liked the depth of field before you switched away from automatic. So let's keep that the same. Let's keep the aperture right at the same level. If you don't touch the aperture, the exposure will not change as a result of the aperture. All right, so now all we have left is the ISO. Right now our image is brighter, but we want it to go darker. So let's look at that key. When ISO goes up, exposure goes up. We don't want that. So when ISO goes down, exposure goes down. Simple. Turn down the ISO, your exposure goes down with it, and it balances back out, and we are perfecto. I cannot write. And we're right back to where we started with the exposure. So I wanted to make this super short, super brief, but I really hope I was able to really convey what exposure is and how to use the three pillars, the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed to get the image that you are looking for. All right, to my new photographers out there, I know this is gonna take a while to get, and I really don't want you to worry about it. That's how it is for everybody, okay? Trust me, I know. But if you have any questions, always feel free to DM me. I'm readily available on Instagram at NayoAphoto, or leave a comment right below. Thanks so much for watching today.